welcome to BLT. We are in our third week. Oh, look at that. We've got the studio audience clapping away. That's amazing. So we are going to introduce our very special guest tonight, who, although he is currently living in New York, is originally from Glasgow and spent many years. I think maybe you'll tell me just how many years it was, Rabbi Rubinstein, as the chaplain in Manchester and the Northwest,
25.
during the time of which I had the privilege of having Rabbi YY as my chaplain. And what a lovely 3 years in Manchester that well and truly was. A truly spectacular individual we have with us tonight. And before we welcome him in and spotlight him for all of you watching at home, and our live studio audience, Shira on the couch over there. So our sessions, our 4 BLT programs, Don't Stop Me Now. The series is dedicated in honor and in memory of Harav Yaakov Tzvi ben David Aryeh, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono Livracha. And please God, it should be a big zechus to have so many people signed on tonight, as they have been the last couple of weeks as well. And we are thoroughly looking forward to tonight's presentation. Do they say presentation out in New York?
Totally.
It sounds like they do. Sounds like something American. But in any event, Rabbi Rubinstein requires very little introduction, having been so popular on these shores, a regular broadcaster, author of several books, some of which I have in my home, and some of which we might hear about a little bit tonight. And without further ado, I am going to just get off the screen and hand over to the one that we're all here to see. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Rabbi YY Rubinstein.
Wow, that was a fabulous introduction, Nick. Thank you so very much. And a particularly warm welcome from across the pond to all the wonderful congregants in Bushy. It's absolutely fabulous. As I say, I was listening to you all chatting away 10 minutes. It's obviously an extremely friendly and warm community. Well done. Right, so I'm supposed to be talking to you about things like resilience and strength and getting through difficult times and stuff like that. Let me tell you a true story, because rabbis always start with true stories. And I actually heard the story when I was in London for Camp Simcha for their retreat about 3 years ago. Apparently it's a true story. It's about a Hasidic Rebbe. Now, as you probably know, almost every single story about Hasidic Rebbes are not true. I speak to somebody who's not Hasidic. But anyway, here is apparently a true Hasidic story about a Chassid who had a terrible character flaw. He had an uncontrollable temper. I don't know if you've come across anything like that, but in America, they call it a rageaholic. Have you heard the expression, a rageaholic? And this guy was a rageaholic, but he was not a bad person. When he lost his temper, he regretted it almost instantaneously. In fact, everything in his life was instantaneous, so like losing his temper, regretting it. And the damage that was done when he lost his temper was really tremendous. I mean, his wife suffered enormously, his kids suffered, his neighbors, employees suffered. And as I say, he regretted it, but he just wasn't able to control it. So of course, if you are a chassid and you have a problem, where are you going to go with your problem? But to the Rebbe, which is what he did. Now, I actually used to know the name of this Rebbe, but I've forgotten it. But it's a real fellow. So he goes to see the Rebbe, and he's a big fellow. He's sitting in front of the Rebbe, and he's literally crying. He's pouring his heart out, explaining to the Rebbe exactly what his problem is and the damage that it does to everybody whom he loves. And the Rebbe is sitting, stroking his long beard. And after about 20 minutes, he said, "Look, I want to give you the best advice that I possibly can. But in order to give you the advice, I want to just betracht. I want to think over this situation. Do me a favor, go outside my room. You'll find a chair in the hallway. Sit in the chair. Give me 10 minutes just to consider the best advice to give you." So the chassid gets up and he goes outside. And when he goes outside and is sitting in the chair, the assistant to the Rebbe, the shamus, sees that the Rebbe's on his own, and in he comes. And he opens the door and he says, "Rebbe, willst du haben a glass tea? Would you like a cup of tea? A cafe?" The Rebbe said, "Kim herein, come here. Come here." So in comes the shamus, little guy, And the Rebbe says, close the door. So he closes the door. He says, come, come, come. So he comes over and the Rebbe says, that fellow, that chassid of mine sitting outside, has a very, very serious problem. He has an uncontrollable temper. And the shamus goes, oh. He says, and I want to give him the best possible advice I can. And the shamus goes, mm-hmm. But in order to give him the best advice, I have to get a feel. The Yiddish word is a gefühl. I have to get a gefühl of what that temper's like. And the shamus goes, mm-hmm. So the Rebbe says, so go out and get him to lose his temper. The shamus says, and go out and get him to lose his temper. Provoke him. No, off you go. So out goes the shamus, and he walks past the big chassid sitting in the chair, and they're almost at eye level, right? Big chassid sitting in the chair, shamus walks past, almost eye level, and so the shamus smiles weakly at the chassid, who smiles back, and the shamus goes into the kitchen and prepares a tray, the way that he would normally do to bring coffee and tea to the Rebbe, with biscuits and milk and sugar, and he brings the tray, and as he's walking past the chassid sitting there, he pretends to trip and spills the entire thing all over the chassid, this big fellow with the terrible temper. And the fellow jumps up and goes, Dagenish, don't worry. It could happen to anybody. You're supposed to get him to lose his temper. So the shaman said, well, if you hadn't stuck your great big feet out, I wouldn't have tripped over them, which he hadn't done. And the guy at the shaman said, you know, you're quite right. I do have big feet. So the shamus gathers up all the broken bits of crockery and cutlery on the floor, and he puts it back in the tray, and he comes into the Rebbe, and he comes, closes the door. He goes, I tried. The Rebbe says, don't worry, put down the tray, send the fellow in. Out goes the shamus. In comes the big chassid. The Rebbe said, are you okay? He said, yeah, are you sure you're okay? And he's giving him Kleenex to clean himself off with. He said, sit down, and he's passing him more Kleenex. The guy's covered in brown coffee stains in his white shirt, white milk stains in his black jacket. And after he's completely cleaned himself off there, he said, are you sure you're okay? He said, I'm absolutely fine. So the Rebbe said to him, you come to see me because you've got a problem with your temper, yes? And the chassid said, yes. And the Rebbe said, I didn't see much evidence of that temper a few moments ago when the shamus spilt all the coffee all over you. And a little smile broke out on the lips of the big chassid. And he said, well, to tell you the truth, Rebbe, I overheard you telling him to come out and get me to lose my temper. And the Rebbe said, to tell you the truth, I meant you to overhear me. You see, you think you've come to see me because you've got a problem with your temper. No, you don't. You have a problem with your basic faith and emunah in God. When you overheard me telling the shamus what should happen, and it happened, you had no problem accepting that at all. The Rebbe had decided this is what was going to happen. You got it. But when the Rebbe of the Rebbes, the Almighty himself, Hashem, decides that things happen to you in your life and you don't understand and you can't work out, boom, you lose your temper. You don't have a problem with your temper at all. You have a problem with your faith in God. And I thought that was an extraordinarily good story and a true one. But the main point of the story, the bit of the story that I like the best, is the fact that it's so possible for us, that's you and me, to go through, as Rabbi Dessler famously says, your entire life without knowing exactly who and what you are, unless you're in circumstances which are a tiny wee bit dramatic. There was a famous rabbi called Rabbi Shalom Schwadron. I don't know if you've heard of this fellow. He was a great, great saintly rabbi from Jerusalem, big long beard. And he used to travel around the world speaking all over the place. I used to do that as well. That was in the days when they had airplanes in the sky. Do you remember the days when they had airplanes in the sky? Anyway, so basically, he used to, I mean, everybody rushed to hear him speak. Wish they did that to me. Anyway, so basically, he was walking down the street in the Shari Chesed district of Yerushalayim. And this saintly, famous old rabbi is walking down the street. And there was an old Yiddish Baba standing outside her apartment, and she saw him coming. So she gave a demure little nod in his direction, and he gave a demure little nod back to her. At the end of the street, there was a bunch of little boys doing what little boys do best: dangerous stuff. And they were walking along a wall as though it was a tightrope. And one of the little boys fell with a crash onto the pavement. And the old Baba saw that it was her grandson, her anicle, and she went, ah! And she started to run towards the grandson. The great sage, this Rabbi, Reb Shalom Shvadron, said to her, Deige nicht, don't worry, soll sein gut, it'll be fine, it'll be fine. As she got halfway towards the little boy, she discovered that her old eyes had deceived her. It wasn't her grandson at all. It was his grandson. So she turned around and said, Ist nicht meine Enkel? Ist deine Enkel? It's your grandson. And he went, ah! And he started to run down the road. What happened to Deige nicht, don't worry, soll sein gut, it'll be fine. That's what he thought he was like. That's what he thought people should think. When it came to him himself, he discovered something about himself. He didn't believe that as much as he could have. He still had some work to do. And you can go through your whole life and not knowing exactly who and what you are. I must tell you a story. My first ever trip when I was lecturing in South Africa, this is going back a wee while. Did you get the Scottish there? I'm just trying to establish that I'm actually Scottish. I was supposed to fly from Johannesburg to Durban. And I arrived at the airport. I am incidentally an extremely nervous flyer. I'm not nervous about, sort of like dying, but I get nervous about missing the flight. So if they tell you to be in the airport an hour before, I'm there 2 hours before. If they tell you to be there 2 hours before, I'm there 4 hours before. And I was there in plenty of time. When I went to the screen to see where my flight was, then it was delayed by half an hour, which was no problem because I was plenty of time. And when I went back to look at the screen a half hour later, it was delayed by another half an hour. And then another half an hour. Now, if you know anything about South African Jews, you will know that they are truly remarkable people. And they are desperate just to learn about their Jewish heritage and their religion. They just really are very, very positive about the whole thing. And they told me that the entire Jewish community of Johannesburg was going to be turning out to hear me. And now it was going to be touch and go if I would get there in time. And after a full 2 hours delay, eventually we had to go to gate 7. It was just getting dark, just the end of the day. And we all got onto this British Airways flight and we all found our seats. I always choose a window seat. There are 3 reasons for this. The first reason is I never really grew up. The second reason is, I don't know if you know this, but you can often tell which country you're flying over by the shape and the color of the fields below. And when I flew down on a Virgin Atlantic flight, on which was Sir Richard Branson himself, came down to greet us. Hi, I'm Richard, he said. Hi, I'm YY, I said. But it was at night time, so I didn't get a chance to see what African fields look like. I wanted to see what African fields look like, which are incidentally totally different to European and certainly British fields. And the third reason is I find airports extremely interesting places, intriguing, with all sorts of flashing lights and signs. And I always wonder how the pilot knows how to get onto the runway and all this stuff. We went onto the runway and our pilot addressed, ladies and gentlemen, British Airways, ladies and gentlemen, this is the pilot speaking, must apologize for the late departure of your flight. This was due to the failure of an engine part, and given the adverse weather conditions, we couldn't fly until it was repaired, which struck me as a particularly good idea. Anyway, he said, our flight time will be 55 minutes, our altitude will be 35,000 feet. Please sit back and relax. They'll speak to you during the flight. I sat back and relaxed. And I noticed painted on the side of the runway, there were 3 yellow parallel lines. And I wondered, what's that about? Why? Why yellow? Why 3? As we picked up speed and started to move down the runway, about halfway down, the 3 yellow lines became 2 yellow lines. I thought, oh, look at that. Why did it change? What's that about? And I thought to myself, maybe that's telling the pilot the point at which he should be lifting up the nose and taking off. And then a thought came into my mind. Why isn't the pilot lifting up the nose and taking off? I distinctly remember thinking, I hope it's a very long runway. And the plane was shaking like crazy, but eventually we took off. I looked out the window, and as I say, African fields are totally different. And then I sort of went into a little thought to myself, what will I say when I get there? Will I tell them this talk or give them another lecture? What stories will I tell? And after about 10 minutes, I decided what I was going to speak about when I arrived. I was looked out the window, it was just almost dark, but you could just see the fields, totally different. And then a thought came into my mind. How come you can still see the fields? What happened to 35,000 feet? At 35,000 feet, you can't see the fields anymore. And then our pilot spoke to us again. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your pilot speaking. There's nothing to worry about. Now, ladies and gentlemen of Bushy, I want to give you some sage rabbinic advice. There are certain professions that use certain key phrases that you should be alert to. For example, if your doctor tells you you may experience some discomfort, he really means you're going to experience acute agony. If your lawyer tells you it won't cost you much, it means you're bankrupt. And when your pilot tells you there's nothing to worry about, it means that he thinks that you're going to die. And on this particular occasion, what he explained is that we had nothing to worry about was the fact, as he told us, we'd lost the front wheels on takeoff. And I thought to myself, oh, is that all? Whoa! You see, with my superior Talmudic brain, 7 years in Gateshead Yeshiva and 3 years after that in post-rabbinic studies, I had worked out it's no problem. We are up. And it was only a few seconds later that little voice insinuated itself into my mind and said, Rubinstein, you moron. And how are you going to get down again? Oh, yeah, okay. Anyway, so they then moved us all out of the front of the plane into the back of the plane, because you really do want to get as much weight off the front of the plane as possible when you no longer have any wheels there. And then they prepared us for the crash landing. Now, this is not the usual nonsense you see when you get into a plane and, they play a little video or, tie it in a double bow at the side that nobody in the history of aviation has paid the slightest attention to. This is quite serious. They're preparing you for a real crash landing. So you've got to go through the drill. You've got to take off your shoes. They make you take off your tie if you're wearing a tie. You've got to take off your glasses if you wear glasses. And you've got to practice the crash or the brace position, which is putting your hand on your head and pushing as hard as you can into the seat in front of you. So not only are you going to die, you're going to get a sore back as well. Anyway, so basically, there was a stewardess. You're not allowed to say that anymore. It's politically incorrect. There was a flight attendant-ess, and she was calming down a young lady opposite me because she was very upset that they'd made her take off her glasses. And after she calmed her down, which took 5 minutes, she turned to me and she said in her South African accent, "Can't you see very well without your glasses, sir?" Did you all get that? You're muted, so you have to give me a thumbs up there. Yeah. Okay, good. "Can't you see very well without your glasses, sir?" Now, I would like you, obviously being British, you're highly intelligent, not like these Americans. I would like you to consider that question for just a few seconds. Can't you see very well without your glasses, sir? Seriously, have you ever heard a more stupid question in your entire life? I felt like saying, no, I can see perfectly well without my glasses. It's just that my nose feels naked without something sitting on it. Duh. She said, "Can you see the armrest of the seat in front of you?" I confirmed that I could see the armrest of the seat in front of me. "I'd like you to touch it for me." So I touched the armrest. "Good," she said. "When we crash, notice the use of the word when. When we crash, I'd like you to find your way to the exits holding onto the armrests." I said, "Thank you." And off she went, and I took out my glasses and put them back on, because if I'm going to die, I want to see it happen. Anyway, it was the Hebrew month, Elul, the one coming up for Rosh Hashanah, the Yom Hadin. And, one of our prayers that we say in Rosh Hashanah, we say, "Almighty Hashem, I'm supposed to apologize, but I've done so many things wrong. I'm afraid I can't even remember them all." I have to tell you, when you think you're going to die, and the serious bit was that I did think I was going to die, you know precisely and exactly who and what you are and where your failings lie. In my case, there were five major flaws that I, in conversation with the Almighty, assured him that if he got me out of this, I would do my very best to put right. But there isn't a very important message here. Sometimes it takes something very, very dramatic in your life for you to discover exactly who and what you are. And sometimes when you do, you get a very pleasant surprise. Thinking about this, when Rabbi Nick gave me the topic, I have to tell you, let me tell you a story from when I was the university chaplain from Manchester in Liverpool, the northwest of England. There was a young lady at the university, and she was a great young lady. She's still in touch with me. I was very close to her and her then boyfriend stroke fiance. And towards the end of her academic career, she had a breakdown. She had a mental breakdown, as we used to call it. She had to go away. She came back the following year, finished her degree, and thank God her life's been blessed and fabulous, and she deserves every blessing she could get. However, her fiance, her fiance told me that her father took her to the psychiatrist or the psychologist who was working with her because obviously she had to get back on her feet. And her father was an Auschwitz survivor. So they both came in, and there was the psychiatrist there, and the father started speaking. And the father said, she has to stop this nonsense. I was pulled from a pile of corpses in Auschwitz. I shouldn't be here. If I am here and she is here, she has to be the best person she could be. Nervous breakdown, what's it now? Crazy, it's nonsense. You've got to sort it. And on this fellow went. And the psychiatrist, who was a remarkably wise fellow, said to him, okay, Mr. whatever his name was, if you'd like to sit outside, I'll speak to your daughter. And the fellow went outside, and as soon as he closed the door, he turned to the daughter and he said, you don't need me. Your father needs me. It was a very important point. Because if you think about it, almost every Jew that I'm talking to now, and certainly in the United States of America where I live, almost all of us are where we are because, if not us, but our grandfather, or rather great-grandfather, or great-great-grandfather, ran away from something awful to be where we are now. I mean, living in Bushy and living in London, North London, I mean, it's gorgeous and all that sort of stuff. And thank God we got rid of Jeremy Corbyn and all that. You know, normality has returned a little bit. In America, it's not quite the same. But every Jew comes, almost all of us are refugees running away. So I thought, always struck me, why is any Jew normal? Because, you know, it really is the case that, you know, a traumatic, terrible experience, you know, would be passed on to the next generation and the next generation. I always imagined when I was dealing with students at university that maybe a great-great-great-great-grandfather of one of my students who needed serious help was maybe beaten up by Napoleon Bonaparte's anti-Semitic soldiers, and that made him neurotic to pass it on to his children, his children, his children. Why are we, any of us, normal? Why did we get through what we have got through and still be sitting here having an online talk about Judaism, and there's so many people who've joined in? Why are we here? Why are we still here? Why are we still members of Bushy Shul or Shuls all over the place? Jews are remarkable. I have to tell you, I remember when I was living in Manchester, I got a phone call one day from Diane Krause's Rebbitzin. Diane Krause was the Rosh Beis-Din. I think he's retired now, of the Manchester Beis-Din. And Rebbitzin Krause phoned me to say there was a young woman in Whitefield in Manchester who had been married for 9 months. She was 6 months pregnant, and her husband had just been killed in a car crash. And they wanted me to come and talk to the family. Now, I wasn't the rabbi of the show. I don't know why they wanted me. I figured that they wanted just a rabbi to shout at. I mean, you can't really shout and scream at God. It's certainly to blame, as it were. And therefore, you can't shout at God, but you can shout at one of his rabbis. And I thought it'd be a mitzvah to allow myself to go and be shouted at. So I drove up there, and I literally could not have been more wrong. The whole family had put a notice in the door, no visitors this morning. And they made a big circle. I think there was about 14 people. And they honestly just wanted to ask the question, the classic Jewish question: why do bad things happen to good people? Why did this young husband waiting for the arrival of his child, this young mother-to-be, have her husband plucked away from her in such tragic circumstances? And that was that. There was no anger. They just wanted to talk. I have to tell you that 2 years later, it was Yom Kippur, and I was giving a speech in Steen Court Synagogue, if any of you know Steen Court in Manchester. And after I had to go and speak in another synagogue, I very rarely do any praying in Yom Kippur, too busy talking. Anyway, so I was going out, and there was a young woman there with a little baby putting a little coat with a little duffel coat, I remember, with little toggle buttons. And I said, Yontiv. She said, Yontiv, and I disappeared. The next day, around the corner from where I used to live in Singleton Road, there was the same young woman again. And she was just coming out of the car. She just put her baby in the baby seat. And she said, you don't remember me, do you? And I said, no. And this was the young woman who had just lost her husband 2 years before that I went to visit. And we talked about that. And she explained she's about to get married again. And not only that, she, who was more of a traditional sort of Jew, was actually married, had become religious. I was marrying a religious man. They now live in Israel. I gave a share in her show not too long ago, and there she came to see me again. But this young woman had gone through all sorts of really appalling times, would have, I would say, great justification for saying, God, I'm done with you. For you to take me away from, that's it, I'm out of here. But I find, as a rabbi, and even in my own life, that when really difficult times come along, very often that brings out in a Jew something in he or she that they never realized was there. And maybe it's because we come from such a long line of difficult times. Maybe we absorb it with our mother's milk. I do not know. However, Jews are totally remarkable. And sometimes when you find yourself and you discover who you are, when those very serious occasions occur to you, I hope it's not a plane crash, sometimes you find it's not that, you know, you've got to work on yourself from something negative. Sometimes you find there's a treasure within yourself all the time. And I remember I was once, the first time I was ever giving a lecture series in San Diego in California, which of course has a totally perfect climate. And there are two Orthodox shows there. This was the smaller of the two. And I was, do you ever see a face that you just like? That you just immediately like? Did you ever have that experience? In the show, it was a very small show, there was a very old fellow, a man in his 80s. And he looked as though he was in his 80s. I mean, he was, you know, I speak as an ancient myself these days, 65. But anyway, so basically, this fellow, he had wrinkled face and stuff like that. But he had twinkling blue eyes and the most gorgeous smile I ever saw. And he was sitting out, they put me in the front, you know, the rabbi, the visiting rabbi thing, sitting at the front, rabbi, one side of the Arna Kodesh, me on the other side. And there he was, in his sparkling blue eyes. Anyway, I gave a talk the next day. The topic was suffering and why do bad things happen to good people. They had chosen that topic. And afterwards, this old fellow, when we went in for the meal, he came up to me and said, Rabbi, I want you to know that everything you said about suffering was 100% correct. And then he held up his right hand. And what I hadn't noticed was these three fingers were missing. They'd been chopped off by an SS man sticking his hand into a chopping machine in a factory where he was forced to work. He was an Auschwitz survivor. And we chatted a little bit more. And off he went. And another fellow came over. This guy lives in Detroit, younger than this fellow, I would say sort of early 70s. He said, Rabbi, more of an American accent, I'm supposed to be speaking this afternoon at Suda Shlishis. You've taken away everything I wanted to say. I was in Auschwitz. But in that afternoon, I wanted to hear what an Auschwitz survivor would have to say about tough times. And this is what he said. This is well worth hearing. He said, one day, a group of us boys were standing at the corner of a barracks within sight of the chimneys of the crematoria. And one of the guys says to us, I'm happy I'm in Auschwitz. We said, what? He said, I'm happy I'm in Auschwitz. We said to him, you crazy, you sick, you mashuga, you happy you're in Auschwitz? He said, yeah. And if I wasn't happy, so where should I be? Still in Auschwitz. And I have to tell you, when I heard those words, I was sitting there thinking, wow, I mean, wow. And then he said something which is very interesting. He said the Talmud tells a famous story about somebody called Nochem Ish Gamzu. Has anybody ever heard of Nochem Ish Gamzu? Whatever happened in his life, he used to say, Gamzu Latoiva. This also will be good. That's why he got his nickname, Nochem Ish Gamzu. Gamzu Latoiva. This will also be good. So he told that story, and a lot of people there had heard of him, and they all noted, Gamzu Latoiva. Yeah. He said, you know how you read that Gemara? Gamzu Latoiva. This'll make good. Wow. And then he turned to this audience of about 200 Jews, and he said, and if you haven't suffered, you haven't lived. If you haven't suffered, you're nothing. Because how else are you going to help other people when they're suffering? Boom. I wrote one of my books that Rabbi Nick mentioned before. One of my books sitting over there. It's called The Little Book for Big Worries. I'm going to show you. Oh. you'll see. Wait. Not trying to sell it to you, although I do think you should have it. It's a little book. There it is, The Little Book for Big Worries. And see the title there, Dealing with Serious Illness. And it's written, I wrote it for people who are looking after people who are not well. My late wife had breast cancer for 5 years. And I was asked to write about this, so I did. The interesting thing is, because it says on the cover, dealing with serious illness, it never sold in the stores, never sold in the shops, because people picked up, saw the word illness, and dropped it. But there's almost none left, because for some reason, people who were ill, who got the book, found it a big help. There's one guy in Brooklyn who was given the book and went out and bought 50 copies. And when he went for his cancer treatment, then he would go around and saying, you Jewish, and giving them away. Then he bought another 50. By the time this fellow 3 years later passed away, he'd given over 500 copies away. And it's almost no week, without exaggeration, that I don't bump into somebody who says, thank you, that book truly helped us when my family was suffering, because my dad was not well, and my mum was not well, and my kids were not well, whatever it was. Now, the reason I'm qualified for writing that book, and the reason often people get in touch with me about cancer is, I'm not a doctor, I'm not an oncologist, but they know that I know what they're going through. A bit like that fellow said, if you haven't suffered, you haven't lived. How are you going to help other people? And in helping people with that book, if you were to ask me, would I have volunteered for the experience of having my wife, who I was married to for 26 years, and my kids go through that so I could write the book? And the answer is, of course not. But having been through it, or having gone through tough times, well, the question, it goes like this. You either become better or bitter. And the difference between the two words, better or bitter, is I. Better or bitter, the difference is I. What are you going to do with that experience? Are you going to turn it into a positive thing to help other people? Or are you going to become bitter? Most Jews have gone through tough times. I think it's the defiant, whenever incidentally I give that lecture, which I gave in San Diego, which is called Why Do Very Bad Things Happen to Very Good People, I always start off by saying, please put your hand up if you've not had any tough times in your life. Never seen a hand go up. Most of us go through tough times. So let me tell you, and then I think we can open it to questions. I play the guitar. I've got one over there, and my Fender Stratocaster is over there. And I play the guitar extraordinarily badly. And the reason I play the guitar very badly is because I taught myself. And if you teach yourself, then you make all sorts of mistakes. And you know, once it's very difficult once to unlearn a technique. I hold the guitar with my oh, where's that camera going? If that's the, I will show you. I just happen to have one prepared before the program. So I hold it like this, which is the easy way to do it. But it's meant to be, the thumb's meant to be there, if you can see that, where that line is there. That allows you to make nice big chords. But I taught myself, and therefore I don't do that. So I'm not nearly as good a guitarist as I could be. Same if you see somebody who taught themselves to play the keyboards. Classically trained pianists, you'll see their hands, they go like this. Other ones, if you taught yourself, it's like, because it's more comfortable. But that's a better way to do it. But if you think about everything you've ever done in your life, any skill you've ever acquired, whether it was learning to paint, mathematics, learning to ski, if you did it well, you had a teacher. Any project in your life that was worthwhile, if you want to do it properly, you need a teacher. Well, the most important project in your life is your life. And it certainly makes sense to make sure that you have a teacher for your life. Nobody sees themselves objectively. Nobody sees themselves clearly. So don't try and give yourself advice. That's why it famously says in Pirkei Avot, Asa lecha rav, get for yourself a rabbi. And incidentally, it's Asa lecha, you get to choose. And instant masculine, if you go to Hebrew and it's Asa lecha, it's talking to a man, get yourself a rabbi. The advice for a woman would be Asa lecha rebbetzin. Get somebody wise whose knowledge is based in good Jewish ideas. A woman will understand a woman's problems much better than a man will. And a man should get a rabbi, but you need a mentor, you need a guide, you need somebody to help you discover who you are and maximize the real potential that you have within all of you to discover something really, really good. And when tough times come along, to turn the situation, not a bitter, but into a better, because you've discovered who I am, who you are. I remember when my late wife was very not well. This was the third time the cancer had come back. And one of my great teachers was somebody called Rabbi Solomon. He used to be one of the big rabbis in Gateshead Yeshiva, now in Lakewood Yeshiva, who himself is very not well now. And I remember that he came, he'd been 3 times during the course of my wife's illness. He came to visit her. I wasn't doing well. I could no longer pretend that things were going to get well. After the first time, I was quite convinced it's all going to be fine. Second time, but by the third time, I knew. And I was not doing well. We were going down the stairs and he stopped and he said, you know, sometimes a husband has to be a warrior. And I felt that was justifying the fact that I was worrying. He said, spelt with an A, warrior. Sometimes you have to fight. Sometimes you have to fight when the things get tough and fight to discover who and what you are. I think when you do that, you discover very often something very refreshing about yourself, that you have within you all sorts of reserves and all sorts of talents and all sorts of courage that you didn't think you possessed. But you know, and we'll finish with this point here. When I was a boy, since I moved to New York, let me tell you something about New York. I'm sure you all know New York. People in New York often use the following phrase: I intend to spend the summer in the mountains. Now, when New Yorkers say they intend to spend their vacation time in the mountains, do you know what mountains they're referring to? The Catskills. Now, as Nick will tell you, and maybe it's my Scottish blood, I should by now have learned to be tactful and diplomatic. And when I hear people saying that, particularly when I came here, I should have shut my mouth. But it's just not me. And so I would say to them, I'm sorry, but the Catskills are not mountains. The Catskills are hills. In fact, the Catskills are not even hills. The Catskills are pimples. I come from Scotland, and we know what mountains look like. And if you are Swiss, then, you know, if you want to get to the top of a Catskill, you can wear sneakers, you can wear high heels, you'll get there. You want to get to the top of a Scottish mountain, serious climbing boots. You want to get to the top of one of the Alps, serious professional gear. And if you want to get to the top of the highest mountain in the world, which of course is Everest, you need a team of people to get you there. They, of course, are called Sherpas. I love that name because it sounds like the Yiddish word schleppers, which is exactly what they do. 50 in a team, the average is 50 to get you to the top. 10 make a base camp. And then you got to the next level, 10 stay there, and another base camp, another camp. And then you got 30, 20, and eventually you get to the top. The higher the mountain you have to climb, the more help you need to get there. When I was a wee boy in Glasgow, my mum and dad once switched on the TV and it was Fiddler on the Roof. It was the first time I ever saw it. And I can't remember very much about this, but there's a famous song in it which says, if I was a rich man, doidy, 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 doidy. I'm sure you know that. But there's a line in the song which goes, and if I was a rich man, people would come and ask me for advice all day long. I think that's something that Jews have done very cleverly and very well for the last 2,500 years. I think, or 3,500 years, long before there were psychologists and psychiatrists and counselors and life coaches and all the rest, Jews have innately known and been very good at turning to other people, other Jews, for help, which you will always find because you're blessed to be a member of the Jewish people. Jews, when it comes to kindness, are unparalleled. There's always somebody to help you. There's always somebody to help you get to the top of even some of the very highest mountains and successfully come down the other side as well. So when it says in Pirkei Avos, get for yourself a rabbi, it's good advice. Or get for yourself a rabbi. So get yourself a good Jewish mentor, and you've got 2 in your shul, so there's nothing to worry about. But you get to choose. And when times get tough, you'll generally find that they'll help you to build the resilience and the strength that you need to get through those tough times. Or rather, to find that you had that resilience and strength within you all the time. Nick, I'm done. You're getting no more.
Just trying to find the rabbi, the real rabbi. Where is he? There he is. Oh, almost had it.
Yashikayach, Rabbi YY, and I would still classify the mountains as the mountains in case of just to make it very, very clear.
Sorry.
Oh gosh, he prefers Scotland though. Don't worry, Rabbi YY. He does.
Well, Phil, I'm so sorry. I forgot you're a New Yorker, and I'd spent my entire presentation making fun of New York. Oh dear. I'll just go now.
Having you come to join us in Bushy is a real thrill, and a big yashikayach to Rabbi Nick for organizing. You coming in such a timely moment in which the world is going through challenges in which resilience needs to be called upon is specifically poignant and significant as well. Your words have touched all of us. The fact that you're willing now to go into the firing line and take questions. This is a virtual audience, but I'm sure all of us would have raised our hands in terms of our own particular challenges that we've gone through is really greatly appreciated. So we are going to take you up on your offer. The traditional manner of asking questions is either to use the raise hand function on Zoom, alternatively to try to raise your hand and hope that one of us will see you. Alternatively, there's also the chat function in which we can ask your question for you, or you can do it the Jewish way of just unmuting yourself and screaming. And I'm sure that we can handle that as well. So the floor belongs to all of you. Rabbi YY has given us of his time. So please, anyone who would like to ask on any aspect of this evening's presentation, please feel free to do so at this time. Leslie, are you looking to say something? I know you're on mute. You're on mute.
Yeah. I was just going to ask, any chance of finishing the story with regard to getting to South Africa on the plane? As you were holding
That's what I want you to know.
Yes, if you like. Yeah. Well, I survived. Yeah. So basically, it doesn't make any difference whether you wear glasses or not, because they switch every single light off inside the cabin. Then the captain shouted, we knew we were coming in because of the noise of the engine. We were just flying around to Johannesburg. We weren't going to Durban. He knew he'd lost the front wheels, so he was just flying to use the fuel, because you don't want to have a crash landing when you've got a plane full of fuel. In fact, I have to tell you, and I've seen this many times as a rabbi, I've been with many people who've passed away. I've said Shema with many people who've said away. And when I said Shema, I was quite content to die. You know, I remember thinking, okay, if you're going to take me, I see my two little girls were 4 and 7 at the time, and I got a bit bubbly, the idea of them growing up not knowing who their daddy was. But I remember thinking, you know, we don't say that somebody died, we say somebody's been nifter, from the word potter meaning exempt. You're exempt from keeping mitzvahs. You've gone upstairs, you're exempt. I remember saying to God, okay, if you want to take me, then I'm exempt from keeping mitzvahs, including bringing up my little girls. You're going to have to bring up my little girls. Anyway, I was really quite content. The only thing I remember saying, because it was El, as I mentioned before, when our prayers were saying, me by mine, me by Aish, who by water and who by fire, I remember, as it were, almost making a condition, not fire. A nice, quick, broken neck, that will do very nicely. Anyway, so basically, the noise of the engines changing, the ailerons coming down told us we were coming out to the crash landing, and then the captain shouted, brace, brace, brace. And then the stewardess shouted, brace, brace, brace. There are some things you don't have to be told twice. So we all get into the brace position, and then we came down with quite a bump, and how he kept the plane on the runway, I do not know. And then the escape slide. Yes, I'd always wanted to do the escape slide. Whee! Can I come up and try again? Get out of here, you idiot. So that was that. So yes, I survived. But it was I've made it a little bit funny, but at the time it was actually quite serious. But I learned a lot about myself. I would say that 3 important lessons in life. After my wife passed away, for the first time in my life, I suffered depression. And I'm a much, much better rabbi. I mean, I dealt with students who were depressed and all that, and I'd been to courses and all that sort of stuff. But really, until you experience something firsthand, you can't really be an effective, I don't think you can really be the ultimately effective counselor, because you know what they're talking about, and they know that you know what they're talking about, which means that they can see that you could come out of the other end of the tunnel. So that, for me professionally, or just as being a Jew who wants to help other Jews, that was a very important process. As I said before, no way I would welcome my dear late wife passing away. But again, when I was the campus rabbi, when I started off, I was 30, which wasn't too much older than the students. I thought there's all sorts of advantages you have of being, not too far removed from them. When I got older, and I was still a campus rabbi when I was 50. Is that right? Yeah, just when I was 50. I was no longer, obviously of the same generation, but there was all sorts of advantages that I had by life experience, which meant that when they came to say that their father had become sick, he had a stroke or whatever, etc., then obviously I think it was much, much better as a consequence of that. So some of the biggest crises and difficulties I've gone through has really equipped me, I think, well, to use it in a positive direction to help other people. And again, I'm not saying, I can hardly wait, to be in a car. I was once in a car crash with my daughter. It was, complete write-off, and how we survived. That was a miracle. But it makes you a much better and effective helper of others. And that I welcome.
Thank you.
Leslie, thank you very much. Michael, handing over to you, Michael Marks. Please feel free.
Thank you. Good evening. I very much enjoyed what you had to say, YY. Observation on your use of the word warrior at the end,
yes,
to where you began your evening talking about why bad things happen to good people.
Yes.
And making a connection to a video I saw of Jonathan Sachs,
yes,
relatively recently, where he spoke to that point.
Right.
What he said was, we will never know why bad things happen to good people, because God doesn't want us to know why bad things happen to good people. And the reason, he said, is because that way we will continue to fight against bad happening to good people. That if we knew the reason why bad things happen to good people, we would just accept it, but we don't. And I offer you for your next talk, maybe a loop back when you talk about warrior at the end, which is exactly what you were doing, of course, in that situation, to why bad things happen to good people.
Yes, that's a very, very important point. Another one of my books. I translated the classic work called Shar HaBetochen, of the duties of the heart, the Chavs and Lavos. In the 3rd chapter there, he deals with this, and it's some of the best answers to this question that I've ever come across. But he starts off with a very, very profound statement. When you are distressed, as we all are, when good people suffer, incidentally, there's an interesting gender divide there. And I think it's a Scottish thing as well. I often ask my audiences, if it's a mixed audience, men and women, what troubles you more? Bad things happening to good people or good things happening to bad people? It's an interesting question. I generally find that I'm more disturbed, but why? I'm more disturbed by good things happening to bad people. The injustice really annoys me. And women tend, being much superior to men anyway, to be more upset the other way around. Why do bad things happen to good people? But yeah, he says there, just remember, you're not the first person to struggle with this question. King David, I've never had a son who tried to kill me, but he did. And then he had a father-in-law who tried to kill me. No, nearly, but not one of those. Most of he had some really, really tough times, right? And he deals with this, and he writes about this. So there are answers. We might, as Rabbi Sachs, and I was so very distressed and shocked to to find him not well in the suddenness of his passing, really, very, very upsetting. I think we're all still in a bit of shock from that, but his words there are very profound and very, very important. Thank you for sharing them with me.
Thank you, Michael. Caroline, if you'd like to share a question.
Hi, Rabbi YY. Nice to see you.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I have a question for you. So, I mean, especially even more so now during lockdown when people aren't going to shul, all very well to try and find a mentor or a rebbitzin or somebody Jewish. Where do you go to find that? Because for somebody like me, when I'm working full time and then I come home at the end of the day and I've got my children and family and I'm exhausted, unless I'm putting myself out there to, for example, go to a shir to find a rebbitzin or somebody to speak to, I don't even kind of know where to go to find somebody.
I should tell everybody that Caroline was one of my early victims at university, and I'm very proud to see that she has survived 3 years of YY Rubinstein. Very few did. She makes a very important point, but I'm now going to, like all Jews, turn the tables here and do a guilt trip on you. You are, Caroline, if I remember, a Jewish mother, yes? Jewish mothers are famous at being brilliant at being mothers. If, God forbid, a Jewish mother found that one of their kids was not well, and the leading expert who could save that kid's life was South Africa, Australia, or West Coast of America, and he charged a fortune, would anything stop her getting to access to him or getting the money together to save that child's life? I doubt it. As I said before, the most important thing in your life is your life, Caroline. And look, you don't have to go to Shearing to make a connection with a rabbi. And look, we're on Zoom. We are now connecting, and I'm in New York and you're in London, but we can connect with people all over the world. As-Salacha Rav is, notice it means it's up to you. Look, if in a different world, suppose you and I were a young man, a young woman, and we went out in a date. If the fact that we decided not to marry each other doesn't mean there's anything wrong with us. It's just we're not for each other, right? It's the same with becoming a rabbi. You get to choose. The rabbi of your shul, the rabbi of any shul might be the most brilliant person in the world, but the chemistry might not just be for you. You get to choose the rabbi. I'm sure you get two fabulous rabbis and rebbitzins. And I'm sure they wouldn't be in the slightest upset if you went to some other rabbi who was good, and make sure it's good and is a proper rabbi and all that sort of stuff, or rebbitzin, and got good advice. We all just want you or anybody else to get the best help you can possibly get. When my students went to other people except me, I couldn't care less, as long as they're getting good input. So wherever it is that you can find the rabbi or the rebbitzin or the person, including me, incidentally, saying you had to suffer me for 3 years, I'm still here for you. And you can get onto Zoom, and you don't have to come to share, and you just phone up and say, why can we have a schmooze? Guaranteed.
I know. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Great question. James, over to you.
Oh, good. Am I unmuted?
Yes, unmuted.
Yeah, goodness me. Thank you, Rabbi. It was amazing. You put me in mind of a story of a friend of mine who won't mind me saying he's Habad, so he's a little bit of a character anyway. And he was studying for smicha, and he got in touch with a rabbi and he said, I'm going to make you my rabbi. And the rabbi got back to him and he said, I'm too busy for you. I haven't got the time. And this went on for a couple of days, and he went back to him. He said, doesn't matter. I know that you're busy. I won't drive you mad every 5 minutes, but you're my rabbi. And I don't know quite where the conversation ended up, but he has speaker now. So it just put me in mind of that story. But I wanted to ask you to reflect really on something I've been thinking since Rabbi Sachs passed away. And I can't claim to have been, to have had many lessons from him or anything like that. But I found myself particularly shocked and particularly stunned, and listening to a lot of Rabbonim saying, Look at the canon of work that he would have put together. Look at what we were robbed from. And it suddenly we think to ourselves, it puts me in mind of the times we live. We expect someone to live, thank God, to 90 years of age or something like that. We frankly expected another 10 or 20 years of books from this Rav. And it just strikes me that how when we're stung by thinking, oh, I would have done that learning with him, or this or that would have happened in the future.
Well, James, I've got to say,
I wondered if you wanted just to say about how you think we
easily.
people in that way.
Let me tell you, I once went to Gateshead. My Rov was the Gateshead Rov, Rabbi Rakov's the Chassadik Livrocha. I was once visiting him in Gateshead, and in conversation, it just popped out that somebody in the community, somebody I knew, had passed away, and I didn't know about this. I was really very shocked, and I said to him, "He passed away?" I said, "How old was he?" And he looked at me and he has a little smile, and he said, "How old was he? He was at precisely the age when Hashem Yisborach wanted his soul back again." And Rabbi Sachs was at precisely the age when Hashem wanted him back again. And Rabbi Sachs produced precisely the number of books that Hashem wanted him to produce. And that's the end of his journey here. And I'm sure he's upstairs there enjoying the fruits of that labor now. So you're right to point out that it's a very astute point. My wife just got up from Shiva 2 days ago. Her father passed away at 94 years of age. Very brilliant man, used to teach lecture in physics and engineering at Stanford University in Northern California. A delight of a man. His journey here was 94 years. So the problem is, which you cleverly address, is our expectations. It's almost childlike. Like every kid thinks that their mom and dad's going to go on forever, and that's wonderful. But I mean, life's not like that. So I think your analysis is on the ball. I want to tell you, saying you mentioned Chabad, the late Lubavitcher Rebbe, Zechat Livrocha, always used to tell us Chassidim, "I'm your Rebbe, but who's your Rov? The Rebbe deals with the big stuff, right? The macro, but who deals with you in the micro and you as an individual? Do you have a Rov? And even if you're a Chassid, you still need to have somebody who will deal with you one-to-one that you can get access to." So it goes back to what Carolyn's question from before. Make sure you can't look. There's an enormous stupidity of people, and Rashi says this in his commentary in the Torah, who think, "Oh, the rabbis of our time are not as good as the rabbis of previous times." What nonsense is that? God sent the rabbis of your time for your time. The rabbis of the past would be irrelevant and no good to you in your time, because this is not their challenge. It's not the life they grew up in. They've got to grow up in the same world that you grew up in to be able to advise you. So make sure you get a rabbi, like we all do, who's able to help us, including me, right? I made sure I got a rabbi after my rabbi passed away. You can't live because our lives are always happening. Your life's always happening. It's always developing, always stuff happening. And you can't judge your life yourself. Make sure you have a rabbi who's going to guide you. Thanks for the question, James.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Rabbi YY.
Thank you. Nice to see
wonderful to be welcoming you from New York, and it's a long time since our Pesachs in Scotland together.
Absolutely.
But we did manage to, my father's listening in from Hendon as well, so we've even managed to get Jews from all over the world together tonight. Wonderful. But really very, very special to have you sharing such wonderful words of inspiration with all of us. As we know, it's been very difficult for us in terms of the recent loss in the whole community of Rabbi Sachs, and I know that everyone who has been in touch with him or he's touched on their lives in some way, like you said, we're all reeling from the shock. There's also been a local tragedy as well of a young child who passed away, and I think the idea of taking something positive and deciding how, becoming that warrior, or deciding how to use these tragedies for something positive. They're lighting pink Shabbat candles, which are going to be given out in Bushi they can be picked up from our house or the Ketz or from Flax or Kelman's. It's just a wonderful way for Shabbat to bring in memory of the little girl Sadie. But I think that your message of how to find positivity during challenging times is really something that we all need to hear right now. So really thank you for the chizuk that you've brought to us this evening.
Well, thanks for welcoming me. It's been a pleasure getting to see the community.